realize that we are the saviors we have been waiting for, we are able to affect real change. And I think there has been a dramatic effort to redefine leaks-based journalism ever since WikiLeaks came under U.S. government fire.
Is your personal data the new oil? And who's in control? Are tech billionaires like Elon Musk and Peter Thiel secretly working for intelligence agencies? Was the Jeffrey Epstein scandal just the tip of the iceberg? Is our free will being stripped away by AI and algorithms? Journalist Whitney Webb exposes the dangerous intersection of technology and power.
Yeah, so there's a lot of ways to answer that question, and I would encourage people, if they want the long form answer for this, you can read my book, One Nation Under Blackmail, where I talk about how I think this came to be. And the way I approach it in the book is what I try and do is explain how, first of all, the U.S. intelligence apparatus formed. It was mostly Wall Street bankers and lawyers when it was the OSS, the precursor to the CIA during World War II. And then World War II era U.S. military intelligence decided to team up with organized crime out of convenience and something known as Operation Underworld. And then when the CIA was created, they deepened that alliance with organized crime. And that's why you had so many people on CIA assassination squads and things like that also being organized crime figures from the United States. For example, there was a lot of overlap. And of course, there's a lot of overlap between Wall Street and organized crime, and the outsized influence of Wall Street on the early CIA and subsequent CIA, is something that's worth considering as well. And then when you consider how the intelligence and security agencies of Israel came to be, you have to look back and know that the precursor to these organizations, like the Haganah, Irgun, and these organizations, many of them were armed by the same organized crime networks in the United States. And so once Israel is established as a country and they formalize these paramilitary groups into actual agencies of the state, they kept a lot of those same networks alive and a lot of those same alliances alive. And a lot of these networks continue to wield extreme influence on our society and also Israeli society. But obviously in the Israel case, I think it's a little bit different when you consider the ideological influence of someone like Menachem Begin from the early 1970s, and how he was influenced greatly by Zev Jabotinsky, who his inspiration for revision Zionism, now the dominant form of Zionism in Israel, was openly inspired by Benito Mussolini, and said that this is what the Jewish state should be, essentially an ethno-fascism, basically at the end of the day. And obviously the way the United States developed was very different. The narrative, in the 70s and things like that was not like it was in Israel. There's obvious differences, but the important thing I'm trying to get at here is that the intelligence agencies were in bed with organized crime, a lot of them the same networks, and then the CIA and these Israeli security agencies have continued to team up with those organized crime networks and with each other for many years, and that's why some of the biggest intelligence scandals in U.S. history.
According to Whitney Webb, the historical alliance between American and Israeli intelligence and organized crime isn't just a thing of the past. These deep ties form the basis for darker methods, like blackmail, which have been used to shape political power right up to the present day.
Jointly involve American and Israeli intelligence working together. Iran-Contra is a well-known and very good example of that, for example. And so I think that deep embedding of, between the CIA and Israeli intelligence agencies is one reason. It's also very clear to me that there has been the use of sex blackmail against U.S. politicians by Israel, but it's not exclusive to Israel ever. South Korea did it. The British did it. Different power factions, the United States did it to other power factions they were competing against. And this was really a tactic that was first developed by organized crime with great success for them, and then adopted by intelligence agencies and also other people that are not necessarily affiliated with them, but work with them, weapons dealers like Adnan Khashoggi, for example. They have used these types of tactics to great effect effect. And Israel has done that as well. And that is one likely possibility. There's also the Israel lobby, which is extremely powerful. And also this idea that you cannot criticize certain figures, including people that were, in the case of the Epstein scandal, the obvious patrons of Jeffrey Epstein, Leslie Wexner. No accountability for him, no criticism of him. No one will go after him. And you could argue it's because that his philanthropic, quote unquote, legacy is, things like the Wexner Fellowship and things like that. And most people that are now on the board of AIPAC are Wexner Fellows, or were at one point, and things like that. So, these people are very influential and apparently above criticism. And if you criticize some of these figures, that in the case of Leslie Wexner, his own local police department reported he was tied to the mob. You can't criticize that, or you can be accused of anti-Semitism by some of these big organizations like the Anti-Defamation League that has been funded historically by people like Wexner and also other figures tied to organized crime historically, like the Bronfman family, who came to prominence because of their dominance of the liquor industry in Canada, taking advantage of U.S. prohibition. And they used organized crime networks to traffic their liquor into the United States during prohibition, and basically took over the entire market once it was legalized because of those networks, and have, if you look at their history, have maintained a lot of those organized crime connections, whether in Canada or the United States, for many decades since, and even had their own sexual blackmail scandal of note with the Nexium scandal that sort of broke in the Epstein era. So there's a lot of, things that should be criticized there, but I think, people are wrong to conflate the actions of people like the Bronfmans or Leslie Wexner or Jeffrey Epstein, for example, with all Jewish people, or the crimes committed by the Israeli military or Israeli intelligence with all Jewish people. But this is being done to shield those actors from criticism. And I think basically, the first oligarch of the family was Sam Bronfman. The family came over from a country that was then called Bessarabia, but I forget exactly what country that is today. I think maybe Ukraine. And they settled in Canada, and they basically set it up so that they would be perfectly poised to dominate the market after U.S. prohibition was declared. And there was some weird, I talk about it all in my book and sort of about their rise to power. Sam Bronfman was also pretty closely associated with a guy named Louis Rosenstiel, who ended up becoming, who was also very linked to organized crime, and sort of was allowed to have really the first liquor company that became huge post-prohibition based in the United States. Seagram's, the Bronfman company, was based in Canada. And Louis Rosenstiel went on to be a mentor to Roy Cohn, and Roy Cohn went on to be a mentor to Donald Trump. And Roy Cohn, along with Louis Rosenstiel, were involved in sexual blackmail operations in the McCarthy era. He was a counsel to McCarthy and one of the, lead figures in deciding, who to go after as part of the McCarthy hearings, and allegedly brought about its downfall. As well. Well, pretty much did. And the Bronfmans pretty much since then have had a lot of power in both the United States and Canada. So members of the Bronfman family, they really descend from two of Sam Bronfman's children. He had several children, but the two that really wielded the most influence after their father was Edgar Bronfman and Charles Bronfman. And Charles Bronfman went to form a group with Leslie Wexner in 1991. And at that time, Wexner was deeply involved with Jeffrey Epstein. Yeah, sure, absolutely. So
After revealing the links of old power structures like the Bronfman family to organized crime, Webb highlights a modern reflection of this model in the tech world. She explains how self-proclaimed libertarian Peter Thiel actually works hand in hand with the state to build a monopolistic order.
Peter Thiel has openly labeled himself a libertarian, and this has sort of been adopted by both his critics and his acolytes for really quite a long time, but it really doesn't make very much sense. So for example, Peter Thiel is on video and also in his writings has referred to, for example, a free market competition as being for losers, and his definition of a capitalist is someone who accrues capital. So the most capitalist person is the person that's holding the most capital, or the richest person in the world. And he argues that the best way to do business is to build monopolies, find a niche, corner it, and build a monopoly. And when Peter Thiel has done that in his own business, he's done it in direct collaboration with three-letter agencies. He did that when he helped create PayPal, and of course later on when he created Palantir, which he did with the direct involvement of several neoconservative figures from the Bush administration, Richard Pearl, John Poindexter, and some others, and then of course became very involved with the CIA, particularly the CIA VC firm In-Q-Tel, in order to produce this company. Palantir, which was really an effort to repackage a Bush era, post 9/11 sort of Patriot Act era program that was housed within the Pentagon's DARPA called Total Information Awareness, which was widely criticized by the ACLU and a lot of these other, advocate groups, I guess you could say, in that era. For arguing it would eliminate individual privacy, and basically gut the Constitution and a lot of the protections that American citizens have, which is arguably very true. But they realized that if they rebranded this as a private sector program and removed the public sector from it, that perhaps people wouldn't complain. And that was sort of the impetus for Palantir. And so Peter Thiel and Alex Karp, when they were creating it, went to John Poindexter, who is probably best known for being the highest ranking member of the Iran or of the Reagan administration to be prosecuted for his role in the Iran-Contra scandal. He was brought back for the Bush administration to run this program, and at the time was considered the godfather of modern surveillance, because part of what he did is part of his involvement in the Iran-Contra scandal was sort of set up some of these protocols and be involved in other scandals of that era, largely forgotten, that also involved surveilling domestic dissent in the United States. And so Palantir was really sort of an effort to privatize that. And, if it's a private company, it doesn't have to necessarily follow all the rules that it would have to if it was a public sector program. So the decision was made to privatize it. And there was also another DARPA era program that was related to total information awareness that was called LifeLog, which bears a lot of similarities to Facebook, which was actually launched the same day that LifeLog was shut down, in the same era of these DARPA programs being sort of shut down and then relaunched as private sector versions. And then Peter Thiel becomes intimately involved in creating early Facebook and shaping it, and remained on its board for a very long time, and shaped a lot of its policies, including its involvement, for example, in unconstitutional surveillance, where Facebook collaborated along with a lot of other large Silicon Valley companies with the NSA to surveil Americans, for example. And of course, Palantir scrapes all of that data that's on Facebook and social media and uses that to regularly profile people, including Americans, and has been used in efforts to, develop predictive policing, which is really pre-crime. And Palantir was openly testing that in minority communities in New Orleans and some other parts of the United States, and trying to develop basically a way to outsource law enforcement and a lot of national security policy, also domestically, basically have an AI algorithm run it. And unfortunately, we're sort of at a point where there's probably going to be efforts, most likely under the incoming Trump administration, under the guise of increasing government efficiency, to put AI in increasingly powerful roles, in government, including in law enforcement and other things. And Palantir is a harbinger of that. And I think, if you look at its history, its CIA involvement, people like Peter Thiel and what this program has actually done and what it has how it has developed, it's very concerning. So like in the COVID era too, Palantir was granted pretty much unfettered access to American health data and also to all the NHS health data in Britain on government contracts. And there's really been no meaningful oversight of what Palantir does with that, with people's health data and their history of targeting minorities in particular, and also labeling Americans subversives for intelligence agencies based on Americans' online activity. This is a very troubling company. It's very nothing about it is libertarian or civil liberty minded at all.
According to Webb's analysis, Palantir is a tool that privatizes unconstitutional surveillance. But this is just one piece of a larger picture. Webb now explains how data has become the new oil, and how figures like Elon Musk are racing to become the barons of this new economy.
Despite the fact that Peter Thiel frames himself that way. It's important to keep in mind that, a lot has been said about the world, especially the world economy, moving to a post-oil economy and to a data economy. And so you have had, numerous people and analysts say that data is the new oil in this world. And so instead of having oil barons like we had in the industrial age, like the Rockefellers and whatnot, I think there is a race underway to have people develop platforms and try and position themselves as the data barons of the data economy age. Right. And so if you're like Elon Musk, for example, and you openly purchase Twitter because you want, well, he said it was about free speech, but he also said it was about creating an everything app. And that includes his ambition to turn X, formerly Twitter, into a bank, which he aims to be half of the financial system. If you have people living their entire lives on an app and doing all of their finances and most of their communicating and their consumption of media all on one app, then you have a wealth of data that you can extract from people and then monetize and sell. And that is what pretty much every social media platform does to make all the money that they have, is monetize data that users put out. And then sell it to whoever. And a lot of it is sold to advertisers, but some of it is also sold to government intelligence agencies. And so the fact that you have, people like Peter Thiel in the mix, who created a company that sucks up that data and then uses it to profile people and put them on a quote unquote naughty list for the CIA or any of these other, three-letter agencies that have been, particularly within networks that have been not necessarily open, but there's a very documentable trajectory of them being interested in ways to clamp down on domestic dissent, particularly if there is mass nonviolent opposition to an American war abroad and things of that nature. These are things that I think should be very concerning to Americans. And so even if people are writing in, claiming that they're all about free speech and promoting that, I think their actual ambitions are probably something very different. And so, it's not just what I explained about Elon Musk a second ago. We must also consider that he's one of the main contractors to the Pentagon space program. He's openly building the satellites for intelligence agencies. He's very openly a collaborator with these intelligence agencies that have not, the only time there was a congressional investigation into them was in the 70s, and there was never any accountability. And so when that message is sent, they're going to continue to do their, illegal criminal behavior, especially if they feel like they can get away with it, which they have for a very long time. And so I think, we're in this new, very interesting phase, but I don't really necessarily think it's good, where we're sort of having these oligarchs trying to sort of celebritize themselves and try and build these popular platforms around these particular talking points. But I don't think that's where their motives really lie.
I just wanted to not drop this point about what this health DARPA cancer moonshot was. I mean, I remember Biden campaigning on "We're going to cure cancer," and it just seems such a bizarre non sequitur back in 2020. But understanding, if I'm understanding you correctly, understanding that it was part of some kind of predictive health surveillance, a kind of data program that was intended to do what exactly?
There was
After highlighting the data gathering ambitions of tech giants, Whitney Webb presents a chilling example of how this data could be used by the state. She reveals that the ARPA-H project, framed by Biden as a cancer moonshot, was actually designed as a pre-crime and social control system.
An effort to create this agency, initially called HARPA, but it was created under Biden. Like I said earlier, they moved the H to the end with a dash, so it looks slightly different, but it's HARPA, ARPA-H. And the idea was to create DARPA, which is the Pentagon's advanced research arm, a DARPA equivalent for healthcare in the United States. And so the way Biden pitched it was as a health DARPA, but for curing cancer, right? But the way it was pitched under Trump and the flagship program it was set to have was this program that the acronym of it is Safe Homes. And it stands for something really long that I can't quite remember off the top of my head now because it's been several years. But this Safe Homes program, the idea of it was that there would be an AI algorithm that would go over all of the social media posts put out by American citizens, and that they would that algorithm would assess those posts and those accounts for early warning signs of neuropsychiatric violence. The idea of it was being pitched as stopping mass shootings before they happen, because in I think late 2019 there were a spate of mass shootings in the United States. Trump called on social media giants, actually at that point in time, to surveil people on its platform to stop mass shooters before it happens. And then this particular policy was being pitched to Trump by Kushner and Ivanka. Allegedly, Trump really liked it, but COVID followed a few months later, so maybe that's why it didn't end up happening. Or maybe he decided he didn't like the program. Again, it's very hard to know, but this is how the health DARPA was initially pitched, at least under the Trump administration, as sort of this pre-crime thing. And if you were determined as part of this program to show those early warning signs of neuropsychiatric violence, there was all these different outcomes there could be, including house arrest and being ordered by a court to go to a particular physician for treatment and things like that, all based on whether an AI decides you posted something inappropriate on social media or something that the AI was programmed to believe indicates a predisposition to violence or something like that, which is complicated because a lot of Americans that aren't violent vent online and sort of scream into the void, and aren't necessarily predisposed to violence. And it's very Orwellian.
Yeah, it is Orwellian. It's very Minority Report. It is also, though, I find myself I'm reevaluating my views, because the version, this is basically red flag laws. No, how is this different from what is considered to be a progressive lefty gun reform?
Well, this is my point, is that this is the efficient tech bro version of red flag laws, and it was being considered, by a Republican administration, and then the Democrats have their own version of essentially what's the same policy at the end of the day. But
according to Webb, these kinds of dystopian policies are on the agenda of both parties. But how will the public learn these truths? Webb now shifts the focus to the role of media, explaining how the transparent leaks-based journalism that began with WikiLeaks has been neutralized by new, billionaire-controlled models.
Again, the sales pitch of it is different, because I have some very strong opinions about that as well. I think there has been a dramatic effort to redefine leaks-based journalism ever since WikiLeaks came under U.S. government fire, I guess you could say, and Julian Assange was unjustly imprisoned in Britain for several years, which again happened under the Trump administration. And I think, if you recall how WikiLeaks did it, they would release the data dump. The files were available to everyone, journalists and the public, and people were free to search and go through the information and verify it for themselves. Then we have someone sort of come out and privatize the Snowden leaks in the form of The Intercept, which was created by Pierre Omidyar, the eBay billionaire who at the time also, I think, owned PayPal, or maybe he divested shortly before then. Essentially more than 90% of the Snowden leaks were never made public. And certain stories out of this large data dump, which should have arguably been made public, like the WikiLeaks style, were instead sort of trickled out. Only certain stories were chosen to be reported on out of this 90+%. What else was there? The public doesn't know. We have to trust a small select of journalists that are all on the payroll of the Silicon Valley billionaire to trust them, that there was nothing in the public interest there, if some have argued. And then subsequently we have the Twitter files, where another Silicon Valley billionaire, also tied to PayPal, interestingly enough, come, and instead of even allowing the journalists direct access to the data dump, they are told that they can go through lawyers, as I believe it was, and ask for certain terms to be searched for.
That's right.
And then certain things are returned to them. And then instead of having those full documents that they're reporting on be available to the public, the form that it's transmitted to the public are screenshots that are made available on Twitter and not the full document itself. So you've gotten to a point where now the standard for leaks-based journalism is not what WikiLeaks introduced to the public, which was arguably in the public's best interest. It is now the Twitter files version, where it's just screenshots are enough. And that's how you're able to have people on Twitter, create fake emails and then say, this person did this, or this person's a pedophile or something. And it's not real, but because this whole screenshot mentality, of leaks-based journalism has been established, it can give those sorts of stories credibility and have people sort of take it at face value and not ask for the source or for the document or things of that nature. So I think that is actually kind of a troubling development. And it's interesting that one of the people that was most in, one of the most prominent names in sort of the Twitter files, Matt Taibbi, had previously been sort of courted by Pierre Omidyar for The Intercept, but it ended up working out for them. But he was eager to collaborate with another Silicon Valley billionaire. And why are the Silicon Valley billionaires necessary to provide us with leaks, especially when they have ties to the national security state, as does Elon Musk and as did Pierre, Omidyar. Elon Musk, closer to the Republican Party, Pierre Omidyar, a major donor Democrat, a donor to the Democrats, who I think visited the Obama White House more than any other figure in Silicon Valley when Obama was in office. But you have them sort of doing, similar things and neutering what was viewed as a national security threat, sort of this WikiLeaks style dump to the public and transparency to the public. It was, a bipartisanly viewed as a negative thing. And now we're at this point where the total idea of leaks-based journalism has been completely redefined and reduced to the point where it can be easily manipulated, quite frankly. And I think people would kind of be wise to interrogate why that might be and who that might serve.
In essence, Whitney Webb paints a picture where a corrupt political system and a controlled media work in tandem to disempower the public. Following this dark analysis, Webb offers her own solutions for what individuals and communities must do to break this cycle of manipulation.
Unfortunately, become a reality. And again, I think they're going to frame it in sort of these terms like they've been, I think, testing out with Malay, and frame sort of these destruction of these public sector agencies as real change. But what will they be replacing them with? And will it actually be any better? Or will it lead us into sort of this techno-feudal nightmare,
Whitney, if everything understood what if everybody understood what you've explained to us today, like if we had perfect information and you were given a primetime MSNBC or Fox show and you were able to unreservedly tell your truth for you, obviously, but we're doing a fantasy thought experiment here. If everyone understood what you've explained here today, what do you think would happen? Do you think it would be enough that people sort of understanding the way they're being manipulated by both parties, but in the context of what we're talking about today, conservatives being led to believe that there's going to be real reforms from a second Trump administration and the like, Democrats realizing the extent to which their party is complicit equally. Do you think that would be enough to get people to divest? And if not, what do you think sort of needs to happen?
I would hope so, but I think unfortunately people are looking for saviors. People look for political saviors. If we get the right guy in the White House, he can fix everything and solve all of our problems. And I think they look for those saviors too in media. This person says what I like. And so, you should run for president in 2028 and all of this stuff, or I'm going to believe whatever they say. The left. Yeah, but or I'm going to believe whatever you say. And because I trusted you this one time, I'm going to suspend critical thought and believe everything you said. I think that paradigm needs to change. It's a problem in media. It's a problem in politics. And I think people, again, need to stop looking for saviors and hoping that these people put in front of us, often by moneyed networks that have the ability to put people in front of us on a massive level. I think we should be looking more locally, really, and realize that we are the saviors we have been waiting for. We are able to affect real change. And that's why so much effort has been put in to distract us, to have us focus on these other people, and also to make us feel powerless and alone, depending on what's going on in the world and what our viewpoint is and what we're opposing or supporting. And I think, again, social media is a very manipulated medium. I think people need to probably spend a little more time offline and talking to real people, socializing, organizing in real life, and trying to affect change in your local community, which you actually can have a say over, unlike perhaps the federal level of the U.S. national government, right? And that we should also be putting a lot of our energy there and not putting all of our energy and all of our attention on these political saviors that are in, the figureheads of political parties that we know are very corrupt. And I think it starts with us, and it starts with us realizing that the paradigms we have been told, or really, that have been sort of culturally put upon us, that we should shed them and that they're part of the problem.
You heard that, listeners. Whitney Webb says, log off, nerds. And I am
Or at least take a break.
touch grass. Yeah, look, I've been feeling that a lot. I have had opportunities with my trip to Santa Barbara to do this conference that Butch Ware put on with the Green Party, with other organizers that I've met recently. That has been really sinking in, especially in the political context that we're in, not just because of the election, but frankly, the sort of malaise that I felt in the Biden era and the constant, discussions that feel like tinkering around the edges and trying to make a very basic case for what's not working. I'm ready to make an affirmative case for what does work and get back into the real world. And I really appreciate that closing advice from you. People should definitely check out One Nation Under Black.